This episode is made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.
Hi everyone, I'm Alisyn Camerota, and thank you for joining me on another episode of Distraction. So you know that one of the things that I want to talk about on this podcast is the idea of the mom fail or mom guilt. I hate these concepts. I mean, first of all, I need them explained to me, and second of all, I reject them outright. Well, from the conversations I've been having, my eyes have been opened to why they exist. Including the historical underpinnings of them. And that's where my next guests come in. Maggie Quinlan and Bethany Johnson, they're co-authors of the book, You're Doing It Wrong, Mothering Media and Medical Expertise. And they have investigated the history of mothering in the media. And wait until you get a load of this. So Maggie and Bethany have 2 children each, and they spoke to me from their homes on a recent Sunday afternoon. I have been really excited to talk to you today because this is a topic that it's not that I wrestle with it, it's that I am perplexed by this topic. And so your book, You're Doing It Wrong, Mothering Media and Medical.
Sorry.
That's awesome. Somebody's got to take a bathing suit off right now.
That's a first for us for a podcast. I saw Maggie's face and I was like, "Oh," because usually we have our partners like, "Look, if someone's bleeding from the mouth, take them to the hospital. I will talk to you after the podcast." Like,
that is so awesome because this is our world and this is our topic of how to juggle and prioritize, and is it work or is it home and all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. That was on cue.
It was perfect.
Maggie, that couldn't have happened more on cue.
Like work-life balance.
Yes, they're leaving like now. So,
well, I hope he has his bathing suit on because that sounded very urgent.
We're in the middle of potty training, so.
Oh my God.
Yes.
That's the cutest thing in the world. I mean, potty training, I remember it as, so I had twin girls and then I had a little boy, and I remember it as being hilariously cute.
I don't find any fun in it at all.
You don't?
This is not where I shine in my parenting.
Well, the fact that I do shine at potty training, I think, is also curious. I don't know. It's just do the no diaper thing. The whole thing is funny. Like to me, their little faces and their little trying to get it right. It was all so cute. So just lean into it. Like it doesn't last that long. Just lean into it and take pictures and videos. And believe me, later you'll be charmed by it.
I feel the shame at the moment. So I've got a month for this to happen before he can go to school or get kicked out. So
it will happen. At the times that I felt most hopeless about potty training, somebody reminded me very few kids at college wear diapers. So somehow everybody gets it at some point. Okay, well, I feel that leads in beautifully to the topic of mom guilt. I feel like somehow that is the perfect precursor to the issue of mom guilt. And this is the thing that I wanted to explore with you guys and have been so looking forward to talking to you because you all have, taken a historical look at it, at the underpinnings of mom guilt. And, cards on the table, full disclosure, as you may already be able to detect, I don't completely understand mom guilt. I'm not that compassionate about it. I don't think I suffer from it, but I need you guys to educate me so I can be more compassionate. And so you can tell me why so many women, I mean, I hear it all around. I know it exists. I know it's out there. I hear it in the ether and in the world, but what is that? What do you think mom guilt is based on?
I think one thing we should talk about first is thinking about, sort of defining what is mom guilt and what's the difference between mom guilt and mom shame. Bethany and I study mom shame, which is
Or shaming moms.
Shaming moms, what that looks like throughout history and what does that look like on social media. And when I think of mom guilt, I think more of you have so many feelings or emotions that makes it almost like you're unable to function, that you feel the guilt with so much anxiety that, I think mom shame turns into, pretty deep, like judgment of yourself, fear of being shamed, or also internalizing those messages of what it means to be a perfect parent. And we know that in our society that an ideal mother is framed as being somebody who is white, middle to upper class, heterosexual, cisgender, able-bodied,
educated,
married, stay at home.
And when you say the perfect stereotypical mom are all those things, you mean like in a sitcom? Like where are we getting that image?
So this is a very clear historical idea. So we open our book with a quote from Teddy Roosevelt, and he talked a lot about race suicide during his presidency. He was very concerned that educated white women, he liked them lightly educated. He didn't want women who were like had a PhD or like not too much, but like a finishing school and maybe like an associate's degree, right? Educated enough that you could create a good citizen. And, he talked about race suicide, and he called white women who were educated and middle to upper class who did not have a lot of children, race criminals. Okay, that's the exact term that he used. But he was part of a long line of people who in American history have consistently asked women to sacrifice their political and legal rights for the privilege, quote unquote, of this angelic, angel in the home Republican motherhood. And I mean Republican in like the republic, the body politic, right? So Jane Addams, don't forget the ladies. And John Adams was like, cool. But instead of voting, you could have George Washington and you could raise the next George Washington. How about that? During the Civil War, women were engaged in espionage, did nursing, basically ran the U.S. Sanitation Commission. And in the constitutional amendments that were passed after the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, people thought it was hilarious that women were asking to vote. And they were saying, look, you can be mothers. That is your job. People said, you will become infertile, you will be sterile if you go to college in the 1870s and 1880s. Your job is to be a mother. It will take your infertility for you to study Greek, for you to study physics. In World War I, women were literally on hunger strike. And what was being written in the newspaper was that these women were bad mothers, that they had abdicated their role raising the next generation of Americans. They were given the right to vote in the international embarrassment that was the events that those women brought to pass. And in the 1920s, in 1920, 50% of college attendees were women. And in the 1920s, that fell to historic lows and didn't get back to that rate until the 1990s. There is a long-term, consistent, insistent tradition that American women will give up their public-facing life and their political rights and their legal access because their true job is to be good mothers. I think that's the core of mom guilt, because anytime you step out of that, you're stepping outside of a 175-year tradition of being told that to step out of that is to transgress as a woman and a mother.
That is mind-blowing to me. That entire historical, perspective that you've just given is mind-blowing to me, because I didn't, I thought that we were on a kind of upward evolution, slow, maybe there were some setbacks along the way, but in general, the arc of the female progress moves forward each generation and every decade. And you can kind of track it. And maybe there's some setbacks in the 50s where, we go back to June Cleaver, but the 60s blows it out of the water. And, by the 70s and the 80s, women are, obviously we know that women in colleges, I think the population of women now supersedes men. And so
52%,
I thought,
yep.
yeah. So I thought that the progress was, a steady upward motion. So that is pretty mind blowing to me because, when I grew up, my mom was a school teacher. So my mother was very well educated, went to an Ivy League school, was the first in her class in high school, in her big public high school, was a real intellectual heavyweight. But the only real careers for women at that time, because everybody acknowledged she should have a career, was school teacher. I mean, that was kind of, if you were an uber genius like my mother, you could be a school teacher, basically. I mean, look, there were other women, I'm sure, in cities and stuff who went on to be lawyers and doctors, but that wasn't the track that generally.
That was 1% probably in your mother's generation. And my mother had to get my father's signature to get a checking account in 1975. So
God.
and that was legal in most places. It was legal in Alabama until the 1990s to, wife discipline was legal. So to beat your wife when she got out of line, that was not made illegal in Alabama till I think 1997. So I also, in my education, learning women's history and becoming a women's historian and historian of science and technology, I just keep getting my mind blown when I think about how little progress we've made over such a long amount of time. Yeah.
I think if you think about what happened during the pandemic, right, that we're still living, and the number of women that have left the workforce, and the assumption was that women were supposed to stay home and also be the teachers of their children. And so Bethany and I are in the generation that has been raising our children with social media from the get-go, even before we became pregnant. And, the images of women, having these elaborate homeschools and these, whiteboards in their house and lunches, and then people forming pods and all of that. And I'm like, how am I going to do all of that and do my job, right? But the expectation was that your job needed to be to the side so that you could, manage your children's schedules during the pandemic. And so,
but let me just stop you for a second. The expectation by whom? Because as somebody who did not grow up, I mean, not only did I not grow up in social media, obviously, I didn't come of age parenting during the time of social media. I mean, I don't feel that I'm a slave to that. I don't want to be a slave to Instagram, and I don't feel that I am a slave to Instagram. I don't care if somebody takes a picture of their awesome pod, the homeschooling. That is of such little import to me. And so who is telling you that you have to have this particular, sort of elevated perfection?
I think that the people that I follow and the celebrities and the people in my, socioeconomic status, that is what they did. And, I think about the families who it wasn't an option for them to even keep their children at home, right? They needed to send them to daycare or, find situations, because if you were an ER doctor or an ER nurse, you had no choice but to figure out a situation that wasn't this elaborate homeschool at your house. If you were a housekeeper, if you drove an Uber, right, that these are not even an option, right? And so people demonstrating this on social media, and they might not be intending to shame, but they're not reflecting or accounting for that this isn't the reality for everyone, and this is a standard that's not attainable. And now we're seeing big education differences between children as a result of time out of school and what their family situation is. And so for me, it always—
Maggie, you just said reality, and I think that's so Maggie studies health communication. I'm the historian on the team. Maggie shows me patterns, teaches me how algorithms work and all of these pieces. So it isn't that Maggie and I feel like we should be doing that. The problem is if you're following your friends and family members or their friends and family members and like a handful of like activists or like queer theory people, or, you've got this little mix on Instagram. But if everyone seems to be posting the same things, we know this about the human brain. Your perception is that is the reality. That is what everyone is doing. That is the standard. It doesn't mean that you went into it thinking that's of interest to you, that you need to do that that's what good parenting is. But it's the same way that there's one doctor in Florida doing most of the misinformation about COVID and the vaccines, making millions of dollars a year doing it. But it looks like 60,000 people posting these things because of how things are reposted or screenshot. So what Maggie and I spend a lot of time parsing out in our research is that what is the difference between what you are seeing on social media and what actually is? Because once you believe that's what actually is, it's very hard not to feel like you're not failing, even if that wasn't your standard in the first place.
That is so fascinating to me. So let me ask you guys this. How old are you? Just so we can I can place what generation you guys are. Do you mind if I ask?
I'm 40.
I'm 41.
Okay, 40 and 41. Okay, so I'm 55. And so I think that is the exact difference right there, because we didn't have, in my generation, obviously, that kind of acute keeping up with the Joneses, acute social media, which we all agree is pernicious. Okay. I mean, I think I just have been having conversations this weekend on the podcast with mental health experts. I've been having conversations with women who are doing a deep dive into daycare, and why it's not readily available for so many people, as you discussed, in so many different strata in the United States. But everybody universally agrees that on balance, social media has not helped us. It hasn't helped our mental health because that yes, it's a nice community. I mean, and yes, you can connect with people that you wouldn't otherwise be able to connect with, but that constant having to strive for some sort of optical illusion of perfection is not helpful to teenagers. It's not helpful to moms. It's not helpful to anybody. Yeah, go ahead, Maggie.
I think we want to be seeing more voices of people talking about the structures that we need in order for things like this to happen, right? That if we don't have, universal daycare, if we don't have tax incentives that, will help families during the pandemic in order to be able to make ends meet, we always go back, Bethany and I, to what structures are in place that are causing these mommy wars, that are causing women to blame each other on social media. And, the fact that we even have a hashtag that says mom guilt, right? We don't talk about the way mom guilt is gendered. We see moms doing things like drinking, at 5 o'clock, or giving up on the day because they're just too overwhelmed, or showing images of a messy house. Like, they're still crafting an identity, and there's only space for certain moms to be able to express themselves in that way. Like, only certain moms are allowed to be the bad mom.
Yeah.
And, other ways are shamed.
I'm an educated white lady. If I post a really messy picture of my house, I don't have to worry that DSS might get involved. And I know people that are not in that situation. So everything we're seeing, to your point, Alisyn, is such a projection. And it's really hard to parse that out. So I'm thinking about like the postpartum period, right? We all agree. I think that the postpartum period is terrible, particularly in America. We have the highest rates of anxiety and postpartum depression, suicide. And we also have no paid maternity leave. We have no good policy in place. And we were supposed to get excited about 6 weeks coverage. People who have dogs that can be registered in like the American Kennel Society are not allowed to get rid of the puppies at 6 weeks. That's considered inhumane. But we're supposed to like shout on the rooftops that we're considering getting 6 paid weeks. In a place like Canada, which the last I checked, their economy is not in the toilet and they're not all starving. They get a year paid with guaranteed job protection. Their businesses are legally required to protect their job. Look at the differences in people's satisfaction with the first year of parenting between Canada and the US. The numbers are very telling.
Yeah, for sure. Something. I mean, I was so educated I was talking to Gloria Rivera, who has just done a podcast called No One Is Coming to Save Us, about how daycare doesn't exist I mean, you just have to cobble it together on your own. But just to be clear, Bethany, I mean, just so I'm clear, because I'm a journalist, I have to ask these questions. You're saying that if a working class poor woman, Black, Hispanic, posted a messy house, I mean, DSS still wouldn't get involved. DSS isn't like, is DSS monitoring everybody's Instagram accounts?
So, that's a great question. I'll clarify that. So what we have found in our own research from talking to people who it has happened to, if they're posting it on Facebook and their neighbors follow them, or a member of their community, yes, people have gotten reported to DSS because of things they posted on Facebook. So absolutely, people are watching. This kind of paranoia or comparison, part of it is that sometimes there are real world consequences. And I don't think people making the calls really realize the kind of trauma they're visiting on these families. And to have a messy kitchen doesn't necessarily mean that your children aren't well taken care of, right? But if we're judging a whole life on one picture and making a call on that, and again, this isn't happening 40,000 times a day, right? But we have talked to people who it has happened to, and it's wild. It's really wild.
I walk you guys. I wish you could take the laptop and walk you into my kitchen right now. That would be eye-opening for everybody, because there's a shitload of dishes in the sink right now. But again, like I think that some of this is generational, because I don't care. I don't care about that.
So think back for us about your infertility journey.
Yeah.
Right. Our research talks a lot about how there's this expectation that to be a mother is natural, and it's something that all bodies can do. And when that doesn't happen, right, I am sure at that time, and I don't want to project on you, that you felt maybe some inadequacy or felt maybe I'm not supposed to be a mother. And then there's people telling you, friends and family, just relax, have a glass of wine.
Would you like cruise?
Yeah, would you like my husband's sperm? Like, saying all these things.
I heard that
you're internalizing that. And then when you have the baby, if you're lucky enough, right? If you have a baby, you're expected to just love motherhood, right? That every day I'm supposed to be so grateful that I'm a mother, and I shouldn't regret a day. There's no space in our culture for mothers to say, I regret motherhood, right? In other cultures, there's space for that. But in our culture, there isn't. That as soon as a mother abuses a child, it's all over the newspapers and blogs and things. But that men do that all the time, and we don't hear about it, right? But mothers, it's supposed to be natural and embodied and what you're supposed to do. And then to see what that happens on social media, is fascinating.
I agree. I'll give you my perspective, because I come at it from such a different sort of era than you guys do. Growing up in the 80s, okay, being a teenager in the 80s, I would say, and I think that there is a universal truism here, I don't think this was just suburban New Jersey where I grew up, it was a decade of benign neglect. I don't know where parents were in the 80s, but they were not home. I know that much. I don't know if there was a nationwide cocktail party that everybody was at, or a retreat for 10 years where all parents had to go. That was mandatory. I don't know, but they were not home. And my parents were divorced. So already and my mom was working. She was a high school teacher, which, by the way, made her cool. Okay. So my mom was known as the cool mom. So my early imprinting, of what a working mom was like, that's the cool mom. She puts on plays, she's a high school teacher, and my friends felt that way about my mom. So that was a lot of like positive reinforcement for a working mother. But I was a latchkey kid. I wore a key around my neck. I let myself in, rain or shine, snow, who cares? Like, I found my way home mysteriously from school every day and let myself in. My mom then went back to school to get her PhD. So that was night classes. So I was often at home alone for dinner. I was with a babysitter who was maybe or maybe not smoking pot outside with her boyfriend. I don't know. She vanished. There was a lot of like raiding of the liquor cabinet among, my friends who would come over or at their houses. And so even parents whose moms didn't work outside of the home, and even parents who were still married, which was not mine, I don't know where they were. Okay, either. They were not involved in our daily business. And so I come at it from, I'm at the other end of the spectrum than you guys. Like, I don't think you have to be a perfect mother. I don't think it's possible. I mean, I'm not even shooting for perfection. Okay. I'm shooting for like I'll be more physically present than other parents were when I was growing up. Like, I'll be more emotionally present. And I kind of think that's a win. I take that win every day. Like, I'm not even shooting for an Instagram picture. I'm not shooting for perfection. And I just think that you guys somehow have been saddled with this social media albatross that I feel horrible about. It's not reality. And it's like in one generation, we've swung from absentee parents to hyper parenting, and I don't
intensive parenting.
Parenting. And I hate the intensive parenting because I think it's an overcorrection. If it even is a correction. I mean, I don't know why even people at my generation, I don't know why we've gone from being semi-parented to intensive parenting. I think that there's some happy medium in there. So is there a way for you guys at your age to free yourselves from that albatross?
I don't think that Maggie and I are suffering under that albatross, really. I think the beauty of our research is that we can have frank conversations about what we're seeing, how we think that that's affecting us, and then what we do about it. We spend a lot of time in the people that we talk to and in the studies we do showing the inaccuracy of what people are seeing, and that what we're trying to achieve here is not achievable. That's great news, because then we can just stop trying to achieve it. It's not a hittable target. Like, we say this every time we do a public talk at all of we're like, hey, guess what? We have great news for you. You will never achieve this, so stop trying. Maggie and I, interestingly, we grew up in the 80s. I'll speak for myself here, but I grew up in a hyper religious, moral majority family. And the standards for parenting and mothers were very different in that culture. Very, very different.
What were they? I'm interested. Where did you grow up and what were those standards?
I grew up in upstate New York, Syracuse, actually. And many of the people in my church didn't use birth control, so had between 8 and 12 children. Homeschooling was preferred because you didn't want your children to get poisoned by liberal teachings. People were creationists. Women couldn't wear pants and had to have long hair. And my family didn't necessarily subscribe to all of those things. But my mom sort of broke the mold by running a cleaning business. And this made her perceived as like this hyper liberal person because she worked outside of the home and she managed money that came to her, but my mom only had a high school education. So she didn't have the education during my growing up years to achieve something else. I didn't have that example of women being a high achiever or going to college or going to an Ivy League, let alone, we just didn't even have college. So my mom was ecstatic that I went to college. Her dream for me is that I would go to college, and she knew that I would lose respect in our religious social circle for making that choice. And I did, and it was worth it.
That's intense. That's an incredible story, Bethany. I mean, that is so fascinating to dive into what that's all about. And of course, I understand why that informs your desire to explain the historical roots of all of this and how you see it. That is really fascinating to me. And so, Maggie, what's your experience and background?
Maggie's is even better.
My story is I was raised Irish Catholic. And so mom guilt is in my DNA.
Baked in.
Catholics are all about guilt. And my mom was a wonderful stay-at-home mom. And so I had that idea in my head, and I project onto my children a lot of the guilt or shame that I feel related to not being able to do some of the things she was able to do with us. And then, I feel guilt or shame that my son, because of the pandemic, isn't getting the educational opportunities my daughter did, that we don't go to camps, we don't do a lot of the things that I know other families are able to provide for their families. And so for me, it's just processing, my own childhood and then trying not to project it on to them. And I'm also an anxious person. So I think that really plays into a lot of the overthinking and overanalyzing. And I have to say to Bethany, I can send my daughter on the bus, in the fall, but I kind of want to be the one to pick her up but I also need to be back at work full time. And so, just all the games that I have to sort of talk it out sometimes because I realize they're unrealistic expectations and I can't be everywhere at once.
Totally.
And so I do need a lot of therapy or counseling to kind of go through some of my.
Hey, I have a great therapist. Highly recommend. Hooray, therapist.
For sure. But it's wonderful that you have the support and that you're conscious of it, Maggie. I mean, that you have self-awareness to know, okay, I'm spiraling into this mom guilt, or, call it whatever you want, anxiety about not being able to be everywhere and do everything. And so you have the support, which I think is really wonderful. But I mean, I guess I would also just say that one of the things that I think is that some of these challenges are character building for kids. So, I mean, part of me, and I don't know, I mean, this might be a justification, but I think it's my philosophy, is that when they can't go to camp, or when they don't have every opportunity that some other kid has, or when I blow it and am late to pick them up or can't pick them up and they have to find their way home, or I can't help them with their homework because I'm not around, or whatever, I feel that some of it is building self-sufficiency and some of it is letting them have to fend for themselves. And I think that I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't do that. I don't want to have to always pick up the pieces and shoulder everything. And so, I mean, particularly for what you were saying, Maggie, I think that the pandemic sucks. It has sucked. It's horrible. Obviously, it's changed everybody's routine. It's been a challenge for mental health, but isn't some of this, I mean, as long as everybody stayed healthy and alive, isn't this some of it character building to teach your kids to be, adaptable somehow?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do think they're the real heroes in this pandemic in so many ways. And it has forced us to have good conversations about what's important. For me, before the pandemic, I considered myself a good parent because I like to do things with my kids, go to the park, go swimming, go on errands together. That is where I'm a good parent. I'm not the parent that will sit and play with my children. I don't have a great imagination in that kind of way. It's just not, my mom never played Barbies with us. So I do have to process, I don't need to entertain them all the time. And so the pandemic, because we can't do what I'm good at doing and what is my strength, that's definitely been a challenge for me. And it's more me. They're fine with sitting home and watching TV, but it's me who struggles more with it than probably they do.
And I think, Maggie and I had children a little older than some of our peers, particularly, Maggie's from the Buffalo area. And Maggie's mom was actually a nun. And so her mom really had the pure self-sacrifice thing down. I'm sure she brought that in to being a mother as well. So again, Maggie is holding herself to a standard that is not fair to Maggie, but I totally get it because that was her experience, right? And so we have...
Very few people are raised by nuns.
Ex-nuns.
May I say.
Yes.
I mean, by definition, very few people are raised by nuns as mothers, if you know what I mean. So that is a really high standard to live up to. On Thursday, you're going to hear the rest of my conversation with Bethany and Maggie, and we're going to talk about the very real pressure that many parents, particularly mothers, feel about social media. These are some things that I've never really thought about because I don't try to keep up with the illusion of social media. I recognize that it's photoshopped and airbrushed and all, it's like the best picture you've ever taken. That's what you post. But a lot of mothers, it turns out, do feel like they have to keep up with what they see on there, and it is driving them crazy. So stay tuned for that on Thursday, and remember to subscribe to Distraction wherever you get your podcasts. And please reach out with your feedback. I'd love to read it. You can email connect@distractionpodcast.com. Until next time, I'm Alisyn Camerota. Thanks for listening. Distraction is created by Sounds Great Media. Our producer is Sarah Gurton, and special thanks to Emma Marshall, Melissa Blum, and Caitlin Goldsmith.
The episode you just heard was made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.